We saw this morning Penny Wong issued a statement in memorial to the victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre 35 years ago and today. And she, in that message, called on China to cease repression of free speech, freedom of association, and political freedoms. So we know that the Chinese Communist Party bans any reference to the Tiananmen Square incident from 1989 in China. In fact, from what we can gather, almost all the younger generation of China have never heard of it. It's been so successfully repressed. So for a foreign government to mention it on the day of the anniversary and put out a formal statement will be an unpopular move in Beijing. Penny Wong knows that. She's done it anyway.
Yeah. Also, a decision just yesterday ordering Chinese investors be removed from Northern Minerals, which is a rare earths company. Now today we've seen it's been hacked. Whether these two are related, we don't know yet. But was that a surprise to you, making a decision like that so close to the visit by the Premier?
Well, given that the Premier Li Qiang of China is due in Canberra in just 10 days or so, it was a surprise. The Foreign Investment Review Board, advising the Treasurer, and the Treasurer's announcement we saw, could easily have been postponed for a couple of weeks. But the government's gone ahead with the announcement anyway, ordering this Chinese-controlled company to sell down its holdings in this rare earth mine, Northern Minerals, in the Pilbara area of Western Australia. It's a fairly what the Chinese-owned company was trying to do was fairly cheeky. They were trying to do an end run around the foreign investment laws. They'd already been banned from stepping up their holdings in the company twice. They've been banned by Josh Frydenberg under the Morrison government, and then also again by the Labor government. But they went ahead anyway, using associated companies to sneak around the law. And now for Jim Chalmers to order them to divest all their holdings and put out a public notice 10 days before the Premier's visit, I thought was bold, can I say?
Yes, you can indeed. And it is interesting because, of course, we've just sort of got the last of the sort of coercive punishment that we've had economically with the beef tariffs removed last week. How might China react? How might they view these steps?
Yes, you're right. So to have both the Foreign Minister Penny Wong putting out that statement in memorial for the Tiananmen Square victims, plus the Treasurer ordering this sell down of Chinese holdings in Northern Minerals, so close to the Premier's visit, I think will test the Chinese government's commitment to improved relations. The last of the coercive trade bans on Australia still remain. So last week we saw, so there are 8 Australian abattoirs from which exports to China were banned by the Chinese government. 5 of those bans were lifted, so 3 remain. So there are 3 Australian abattoirs still banned from exporting to China. Plus there's the lobster question. That ban hasn't been lifted yet either. So these announcements by the government, so close to the Premier's visit, will test the Chinese government's commitment to continue relaxing those bans and to continue warm relations with China. The government, of course, the government of Australia has a policy of stabilisation with China, but you can't declare stabilisation unilaterally. Both sides have to be parties to a stabilisation. If one decides to destabilise, then that's out of your hands.
Yeah, and it could be a test of this more mature relationship where there's an acknowledgement that both countries hold different values, but a willingness to work together.
Yes, exactly. The Australian government says that we will not step back from our values and our interests, and that was demonstrated amply today by the Penny Wong statement and the Jim Chalmers announcement. Yet at the same time, asking that the Chinese government remove the trade ban. So it's really demonstrating, I suppose, its adage that Australia will cooperate with China where it can and disagree where it must.
Yeah. I wondered what your thoughts were about the recent Lowy poll. The government is making huge investments in the Pacific, really trying to nurture relationships as a counter to China's ambitions in the region. But many Australians' view is that China really still has the upper hand and will ultimately control that. What did you make of that? And, I mean, is it worth our investment?
Well, a lot of Australians live in apprehension of China's intentions. We saw in the Lowy poll 71% of Australians saying that they feared that China would become a military threat to Australia in the next 20 years. And likewise, there's concern about its plans to expand into the Pacific Island states and to dominate the region and Australia's northern approaches.
Yeah. So, the Australian government continuing to be an alternative in the Pacific, is that the right approach? Do we have any other choice?
Well, the choice would be to yield to China's ambitions. Now, for the Chinese Communist Party to establish potentially military bases in any of the Pacific Island states would be a direct threat to Australian security. It would be replicating the Japanese Imperial Army's strategy of World War II, which was to, as you know, put major Japanese army bases in PNG and the Solomons to interdict shipping, to cut Australia off, effectively to take Australia out of action and to prevent Australia being available to supply the US and the US to operate out of Australia. That was the strategy. To allow China to replicate that strategy this century would be allowing a similar domination of Australia's lifeline to the world. So when you put it in those terms, you can see why it's a tenet of the federal government's policy to keep those sea lines of communication open, to do what it can to maintain maximum friendly and positive relations with the Pacific Island states, and in that way to preclude as much as possible Chinese influence.
Yeah, all the while a very sort of erratic US beckoning. Good to have you on as always, Peter. Thank you.
Pleasure, Bev.